Thanks for checking out this movie review video. This is for the 1978 film The Toolbox Murders, and this is the original one. I know there was like a 2004 remake that was directed by Tobe Hooper, which I would be interested in checking out. Apparently, that one was much better received than this one, and it was also pretty different, apparently. So, remake, like a big time reimagining remake. So, maybe one day I'll end up reviewing that. This one was directed by Dennis Donnelly, who also directed lots of show episodes, including Hawaii Five-0, Charlie's Angels, one near and dear to my heart that I watched all the time, The A-Team, The New Lassie, and It Came from Outer Space. Written by Neva Friedenn, who wrote Superman and Sweater Girls, and Robert Easter, who did Supervan, Out for Blood, Red Sun Rising, Sworn to Justice, Kiss Toledo Goodbye, and Just Sue Me. And also involved in the script was Ann Kindberg. There was actually originally a sequel planned for this film for 1986, but it didn't end up happening. So the next, like, anything related to this you got was the Tobe Hooper one in 2004. The film is very loosely based on a serial killer who was in Michigan who was killing women with various tools at the time. So, much like at the end of the film, it is kind of, it says that it's kind of like true life. So, they give you an actual update at the end of the film on, the people who some characters are based on. And that would be what were their last names? I don't remember their last names. Joey and his family, Joey and Lori. This made the Video Nasties list in the UK, which, I mean, it's pretty easy to see why. The kills have a good amount of gore to them. They're pretty brutal with the way that they're shot, plus the acting that goes into it, all the screaming and, the distress that the women end up being in within this film. You would understand, because back at this point, the Video Nasties list, you didn't have to do a whole lot to get on there. So, I mean, you would see this one and be like, oh yeah, this is a lock to be on that list. So the very opening of the film gives a very creepy serial killer cruising for a victim vibe. Kind of harkens to some other films, kind of like the film Cruising, kind of starts that way, I believe. And I'm trying to think of some others. There are some other ones that start that way, but there are a lot of films that kind of started this way, where it's like inside the car of a killer, just kind of like going around, just looking around the streets. Like, it's literally just like, I'm searching for a victim. The opening gives, I literally just read that. But note that when we're seeing this, when we're in the car with the killer, that there's a religious radio channel in the background, which at that point when I'm watching it, because this is the first time I watched the film, I was thinking, I'm wondering if this is some sort of clue about the motive of the character, or if this is supposed to be some sort of like subtext that they're trying to throw into the film. But it did end up being an indicator of the motive, because the killer, Vance, was very much into, punishing the sinners, basically, doing unnatural things, which it seemed his particular hang-up had to do with people doing things that were sexual. As he kind of talks about a bit, and he quotes the Bible a bunch when he's having his very long, I was going to say conversation, but it's not really, when he's talking at Lori for the most part after he's already abducted her and has her tied up, and is calling her Kathy. The killer is reaching into his toolbox early in the film, and it's pretty brutal and shot in a way that increases the brutality. That was the very first kill that had to do with the drill. And I mean, what a way to really start it. Like, they showed the drill, like, going into the arm. They showed the blood all over the place. And that's the thing. That's what I was talking about. There's plenty of gore in this, and it's shot in a way that's pretty unflinching for the most part. And with the acting that goes along with it, it's gory and it's brutal at the same time. And they jump into it. Like, it gets into it so quickly that you're just like, oh my gosh, I wasn't really expecting this. I was expecting that we were going to have like some story get set up for a bit, and then they'd start getting into the killings. But it's just like go, and it's like killings. I think like there's like 3 killings and the kidnapping like immediately within the film. And that's like before it even hits the 15-minute mark at this point, which is crazy. I mean, that's a crazy way to like just hit the ground running with starting a film like this. And I like that. The problem with that ends up being that when they then kind of reel it back in, they slow it down a bunch, and then it's like investigation time, and meeting Joey and meeting Vance and meeting Kent and the detectives and everything. Then it just seems like the pacing isn't great, because when you set the expectation of how the pacing is starting with the film, and then it takes a giant step back and it just kind of maintains like this much slower pacing, you're just kind of like, oh man, like it just feels worse of a pacing. But you know note how the killer is humming at the end of the first killing, like it's something light and relaxing that he just did. You obviously can tell that that's like enjoyable for him based off of that humming. So that was a cool kind of a cool thing that they could do to increase the experience for the audience, in like a messed up way, without using dialogue, without actually telling you anything. It's kind of more an auditory cue, and then it serves for later on when Kent starts doing the same thing. But I'll talk about that when I get to it in the events of the film. They didn't wait long for the nudity in the film either. There's not like a ton of nudity, but there's a decent amount of nudity to it, including a masturbation scene, which I didn't see that coming. And it is a lot longer than I would assume a masturbation scene would be in a film, especially a film from this time period. So that probably contributed to the whole video nasties list thing. But yeah, plenty of nudity up front, and then it kind of goes away for the most part. But the claw of the hammer kill is probably the most grisly one in my opinion. I know some people may point to something else and say, well, I mean the drill, but the way they shot the claw and the hammer one, like it's to the person's head, and like the way they actually show it in and like pulling out and like the blood flying out, like, and then like the POV shot from the victim basically of like him like holding the claw of the hammer. Yeah, that's probably the most like affecting for me personally. A third victim, not even 15 minutes in, they really pile up the bodies fast. Kind of already commented on that. It seems odd that they focus on the guy at the crime scene saying that he doesn't live there, because maybe it makes you think that maybe he's the killer. Now, they move on pretty quickly from that, especially because right after he's kind of questioned a little bit, where he's like, oh, I'm just visiting someone. Then they go to Vance, who's the owner of the apartment complex, who is saying, well, I personally vet every person. How could this happen here? Like, he's obviously going too over the top, trying to be like, oh my gosh, for a character in a film like this, that is, not for like a real life situation. But then it made me suspicious, and I guessed very correctly. I was like, oh, it's probably not that first guy they were talking to. He's supposed to be a red herring. It's got to be Vance, because they give you the clue of this guy being like, well, I don't live here. And then Vance saying, well, I vet everyone who lives here. So it's supposed to kind of point more at that guy and be like, that guy said he doesn't live here. And Vance said he vets the people who live here. Well, who else doesn't live there, or who else knows the place really well? It's Vance. So I was like, this is a misdirect going on here. So I saw right through it. Yeah. It was, I understand the intention, and I'm sure it does trick people to get the onus or the suspicion off of Vance. But for me, since I've seen so many films that are kind of like this, like I just immediately thought it was him for the most part. But no, I 100% did. It's not for the most part. I 100% thought it was him. I'm like, it's got to be him in the end. Because the other thing is, you then start looking, when you have a suspicion, you start looking at like how the person's body type looks and like what facial features you can see of them. And I felt like it definitely lined up with him. Like, even when they introduced Kent then, who was like, I don't live here as well, I was like, well, I don't think it was Kent, because he wasn't that skinny, so, but, Kent ends up being involved. He's actually basically the cleanup crew in essence, but he can do it out in the open because it doesn't seem like something that's trying to be, hidden in essence. And he seems to know a lot about how these crimes happen, as he shows that he's basically better at figuring out what happened during the kills than the actual cops are. It's that typical kind of like, the police are fumbling in the dark type thing. It's crazy how the murders get kind of talked about at certain points, kind of like they're just neighborhood gossip, which I don't know if it actually ended up being like that at all during those times, but I feel like probably not. that they kind of like made it a little too light and trivial within this film. So yeah, it was just something that kind of struck me as like, well, that's weird. The prolonged masturbation scene in the tub. Yeah, didn't expect to see that one. I was like, do people really like, like feel themselves up when they're gonna masturbate? Like, I don't understand. Like, sure, I mean, like you're feeling horny, like you're feeling a certain way, but like, are you turning yourself on? Like, is that maybe there are people who turn themselves on, and it just doesn't happen to me. I'm probably going too far down this road. I'm gonna stop. But we had a masturbation scene in the tub in this film. The woman who gets killed with the nail gun had opportunities to actually do something and really just waited for him to reload the nail gun because it was a one-shot nail gun from what it appeared to be, because he had to reload, I think, 2 times, and then she just like stayed in the same place and just kept screaming. For that reason, I think this would be a good film for your friendly neighborhood Uncle Pete to cover on his channel with his Nails in the Coffin videos, which if you haven't seen those, go to his channel, Your Friendly Neighborhood Uncle Pete. He literally takes movies and rates people's survivability in the situations in which they're killed in movies. I have a feeling everyone who gets killed in this would have a pretty low nail count, but if you want him to do that, go over there and start commenting on his videos. You should do the Toolbox Murders. Let him know. And I'll send him a message. I'll let him know. I like how after being interrogated, Joey says he's actually going to go find the killer himself, and the cops do nothing to dissuade him. The cop literally says something like, I think he says, like, I'll find him, and he's like, oh, I bet you will. And he doesn't even say it in like a, oh, I bet you will type thing. It's just like, I bet you will. It's just like, shouldn't you be trying to keep him from going after a serial killer? Because in the end, because he does, that's what ends up leading to his demise. So it's kind of on the cop's shoulder at that point. He should have done everything he could to stop him. I'm just saying. I like how Kent and Joey are just hanging out in the crime scene, and it kind of seems like Kent does a better job assessing the events of the murder than the cops do. It seems even more weird from the standpoint of Kent, until you find out who he actually is and his involvement in everything. With Joey, it's still very weird, especially because of the fact that his sister has then been kidnapped, and these murders happened, and then his sister was kidnapped. So you would think that he wouldn't want to be in a situation like this, like looking at these crime scenes, because it would make him think maybe this could happen to my sister. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so for Joey in particular, it never makes sense that he would just be hanging out in a crime scene. I understand he wants to solve things, but I just don't think he would do it. When Joey first meets Kent, when he first meets Vance, Vance couldn't make himself any more suspicious. He basically just like doesn't talk for a while, gives him this like cold, dead stare, and then like barely says anything to him. Talks about like making food, which is actually making food for his sister who he had kidnapped. But yeah, he makes himself very suspicious. So Vance's motive for kidnapping Lori seems to be to replace his deceased daughter. Not only is it to replace his deceased daughter, he finds her and she does kind of look a bit like her, because they have that shot where they like show the picture of his dead daughter Kathy and then they pan over to Lori. So you can see that they do kind of look alike. And it kind of gives you this idea from the story perspective that he's supposed to have been so messed up mentally from her death that he literally sees Lori and just thinks that she is Kathy. Like, it's something. Pause for horror hydration. Oh, yep, there's water all over me. Anyway. For some reason, it's more creepy that Vance is sucking on a lollipop while he talks to Lori and she's tied up and gagged. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it hit anyone else that way, but it's creepy enough. But then the fact that he's just like casually sucking on this lollipop, I guess it's kind of like the humming thing after the murder too. Like, it's those types of things that's just like, they're too normal, they're too quirky and weird that it just increases the creepiness. So that was a good choice. The motive is revealed to be religious, as I assumed from the radio preaching that you heard in the beginning. So there is that, but it's also just like the loss of his daughter and basically trying to regain her. And then just this idea that like women who are sexually active it's unnatural and They're sinners, basically. So Vance believed that Lori was pure, basically. And so that was another aspect. Not only did she kind of look like Kathy, but he believed that she was pure like he wanted to believe Kathy was. Now, when Kent brings in the idea of him having sex with her, I don't know if that was true or not. It seemed like maybe he was just trying to get him riled up, but then the whole thing happens where Kent starts calling Lori Kathy and then wants to get it on with her. So then it made me think, oh, I guess he was banging his sister or his cousin. That was his cousin, sorry. It's like, The cops seem pretty convinced that multiple murders and one kidnapping at one apartment complex in one night aren't connected. Ridiculous. Like, it is literally like a lot of movies from like 70s, 80s, 90s where it's just like police fumbling in the dark. They're dumb. They're incompetent. They're never going to solve this. So it's up to Joey to solve it, which he doesn't, you know? Once Kent knows about it, well, he does, kind of. He does, but then dies, so he doesn't fully solve it. He solves it, but he dies, so he can't get it to anyone, the information. Once Kent knows about his uncle, you wonder how long until he does the right thing and tells someone. The answer is never, because he was in on it. I thought what was going to end up happening is he was going to see that that's what had gone down, and he was going to be conflicted because it's family, and that's where he was staying, and that's who he works for, but then at the same time just be like, no, this is the right thing to do. So, and then he would get involved with Joey, and they'd really try and, like, solve the situation here, but no, it went totally the opposite direction, so it's great that I didn't see it coming, and he was a bad guy. He was involved. Kent definitely contemplates killing Joey with the nail gun that he holds pointed at him, and that actually would have been a lot smarter than lighting him on fire, especially because he was in a building owned by his father, and like it's a room that, like, I assume that really only he and his father were accessing too. So it would have made a lot more sense for him to just like kill him with the nail gun and then move his body. So I don't really understand the whole fire thing, but there you go. It's a fire thing. And that's where the movie diverges from the whole toolbox murder situation, because it's 3 kills with tools out of a toolbox, and then it's the burning, and then it's the knife and all that stuff, because Kent, stabbing Vance. That scene reveals Kent to be just like his uncle, especially once he starts singing while coming after Joey. That's like the moment that everything clicks for the audience of like, oh, this guy's not all there just like his uncle. Like, he's the same, because he seemed pretty normal up until that point. But that humming while he's coming after Joey is supposed to be that auditory cue of what's going on. Why did Kent provoke his uncle? I didn't really understand that unless he was intending to, like, get him to come after him in front of Lori so that he could then kill him, like have an excuse to kill him and then be the hero. So that's my best guess. But if anyone has a better guess, you can let me know in the comments. But that's my best guess. Vance says that Kent killed Kathy, but did he? That's the thing. Like, I may have missed it. I don't know. But I don't think they definitively said what happened to Kathy, just that she was dead. But Vance said that Kent killed him. Or killed her. So I don't know. Please fill me in if you know the answer to that one. What's with all the focus on the doll? That was kind of a weird thing. Like, Vance was like holding the doll while he was talking to Lori, which I really don't understand the whole doll thing. I assume that was Kathy's doll, so it's like a memento. But he was thinking that Lori is Kathy, so wouldn't he just be like holding her or like hugging her? And then it's this extra weird step where, Vance gets killed, so he drops the doll. The doll's covered in his blood, and then Kent picks it up and is like, like coddling it, is like cradling it, and like he rinses it off and everything. I don't get the point of like focusing so much on that doll. Is kind of weird. Sorry, real quick, horror hydration. Ken could have played along with being Lori's savior, but instead he got too horny and he wanted to try and have sex with her. I mean, you get the idea that he did against her will. I mean, it definitely seems like he did against her will. But he could have just played it off and kind of like gotten closer and been like, I'm your savior, because that's how she was viewing it. Like, she was like, you saved me, thank you so much. But then he just can't help himself. He gets like super creepy, and then yeah, then that, like, he could have played it a lot smarter in so many ways. But I think we're supposed to kind of just believe that because he's not all there, that he just makes stupid decisions like that. The post-text at the end of the film really makes everything feel more unsettling, because it kind of makes you think back and be like, oh, based on true events, like, that, or maybe that's just me. Cameron Mitchell's performance in this was very good. He's the guy who played Vance. He did a really, really, really nice job, especially when he was just doing his monologues, basically. Like, those were the best parts, in my opinion. The pacing was good until towards the end. Like I talked about, great pacing very early on, and then it really steps back. And then towards the end, it just kept like, it went on too long. It's like an hour and a half movie, but it seems a little bit longer. The tools used: the drill, the hammer, the screw, the nail, drill, hammer, screwdriver, nail gun. Okay, so there were 4 toolbox murders. Actually, I'd forgotten about the 4th one, but I forgot about the screwdriver is what it was, but that one was probably the weakest one in my opinion. This film plays heavily off the fear of serial killers in the 70s and how they basically could be anyone. Like, that was a big theme in films like this, is like, it could be your neighbor. It could be the person who owns the apartment complex you live in. Like, it could be anyone type thing, because at this point in time, there wasn't a ton known about serial killers. It was a relatively new phenomena at that point. So, yeah. So it was really playing off people's fears. So I could really see a situation where people saw this movie when it came out and they're just like, it's too real. It is way too real, because of that kind of, it would make you paranoid, all that stuff going on at that time. It also takes the loss of a child and proposes that it can mentally destroy someone to the point of becoming a murderer. Like, really make someone so unhinged that they would just fly off the handles and literally become a murderer. Because you get the idea, based off the way it's set up and how the story flows, that Vance was not a murderer prior to losing Kathy, but then he just lost it and then he became a murderer. So anyway, those are all my thoughts on the Toolbox Murders. Out of 5 stars with half stars in play, I'm going to give it a very solid 3-star rating. Excuse me, sorry. But I would love to know your thoughts on this film. Go ahead and put it in the comments. Like it, hate it, in between. Just give me like a sentence or two telling me why you think you like it or don't like it. Do me another favor as well. Well, commenting is not really a favor. Like, if you want to, do. If you don't want to, don't. But please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. It really does help me out. It keeps me motivated. It is quick, painless, costs you nothing, and I would greatly appreciate it. So if you could do that for me, and also hit the notification bell button, then you'll know when I'm putting up new videos, which I'm doing at least 4 a week at this point, which is a good amount. I'm putting in a lot of work, so please just pay me back by doing those 2 simple things. Now, regardless, thank you very much for taking your time to watch this particular video, and until next time, keep it brutal.